Hello, welcome to this new tutorial series in which we're going to deconstruct the Arturia DX-7V, an implementation of Yamaha's DX-7. 1983 this thing was released and just monstered the 1980s. This synthesizer is the reason the 1980s sounded the way it did. It's possibly the most famous synth ever made, and certainly one of the most iconic. And the reason it was so successful and so popular throughout the 80s is because it's immensely powerful. It was way ahead of its time. Yamaha really knocked it out the park with this thing. Now, even though it is very, very powerful, today we're boiling it right down to the simplest possible component, and a sine wave being generated by a single oscillator. Because I want to talk about how sounds are bundled together in the synth, and only when we understand the single concept can we start putting bigger building blocks on top of it. First things first, a brand new definition, if you've never come across FM synthesizers before, is the operator. Now, an operator is a baggage of stuff, a bundle of stuff that contains an oscillator, amongst other things. We've got envelopes and amplifiers and all sorts of other things. But for now, I just want you to treat the operator as like an umbrella term that contains multiple components, one of which is the oscillator, and that's the most important thing. So here we have OP operator 1. It's the only operator that's currently doing anything in this synthesizer. There are 6 of them, as we'll discover fairly shortly. And inside that operator, we have an oscillator with our beautiful dark grey on black background that I love so much. But this is the oscillator that's assigned to operator 1, and at the moment it's making a sine wave. If I click on this image, I've got these options to choose from, and don't be overwhelmed by all the various headings. They're basically just different waveforms you can pick. This was a chip, the OPL, and the TX-81 was an expansion module, but you don't need to know that stuff. It's just a shape. And as we hover over each one of these things, we get to see the shape of the waveform that we're going to get if we select it. And just bear in mind that if you click any one of these options, it actually flatlines the window below. And then if you hover back over it, you get to see the waveform. I think it's like an interface bug. So let's choose a sawtooth, and you can either double click the thing and that'll take you back to the main page, or you can select and then simply close the box down, and we've now got our sawtooth. And then we see it in the oscilloscope. So we are up and running. We've got an oscillator. We now know how to choose our waveform. The oscillator is contained within an operator. And even though we've defined the term, we're not really going to examine it in great detail just for now. We'll add stuff to that definition as we go along. Today, we're just having a look at how the oscillator makes sound. And so if we have a look at this in the oscilloscope, you see the slightly downward sloping curve of the sawtooth. If I invert the wave by clicking the invert button here, literally flips the wave upside down. Basically inverts the phase is the technical term. And then we've got a detune control here from -15 up to +15, and the entire range occupies one semitone. So if I play a note, I get a nice stable C. And there's C 25 cents, 25% above, so it's sharp by a quarter tone, and at -15 it's flat by a quarter tone. So that entire range, like I say, is half semitone. Now you can double click any control inside any Arturia product, double click it, and it will return it to its default state. So we're back to 0. Let's have a look at ratio next. This is the thing that maps the oscillator to the keyboard. At the moment it's mapped at a ratio of 1, which basically means when I press a note, when I press C2 on the keyboard, we see C2 in the tuner. For every number that I increment this value by, the corresponding note will be an octave higher. C3. And then we've got fine tune control. This range here gets me from 0 to 100, and that will represent an entire octave as well. So let's take it back down to 1. So we're going to play a C2. And now we're at C3. Double click, back to 0. Underneath ratio, we can apply a fixed frequency to the oscillator. So now every single key I press on the keyboard is going to generate a wave at 10 Hertz, which is going to be super, super low. It's not really identifiable as an independent pitch that low. If I make it 30, it's a little bit difficult to tell then, but when you click in the box and it kind of highlights it, I'm then able to type explicitly any value that I want. So there's 40 Hertz. You can see the tuner really struggling to pick up anything that low. But if I type 131, we're going to get there or thereabouts a C. And now we're back to C2. The difference is this time every key that I press on the keyboard is going to be a C2. You see me pressing the keys on the virtual keyboard below. Now ordinarily FM synths like to work with ratios, so for the most part you'll see oscillators in ratio mode, but just bear in mind that at any time any oscillator can be assigned a fixed frequency and it will generate that frequency and only that frequency all the time, regardless of what key on the keyboard you press. Now for today we're going to gloss over oscillator sync and pitch EG. We'll come back to them, don't worry, but not today. I want to next have a look at the filter section. So every operator, of which there are 6, has a dedicated filter, and this is operator 1's filter, and by default it's set as a low pass filter. You can see that this graph represents what's going to happen to the frequency curve when this filter is in use. If I play a note and reduce the cutoff, this says cutoff here, it's a little bit difficult to see, then you'll see in Insight below all the high frequencies get thrown away. And if I leave it at 12 o'clock, so we've got some filtering colour to our sound, and then I increase the resonance knob, you'll see a spike. That's called a resonant spike. This is a resonant low pass filter. I've done a video describing resonance, I'll put a link to it. And now if I move the cutoff value, you'll see that spike sweep through the curve and you hear a classic filter sweep sound. So that's a low pass filter, but we've got 3 filter choices to go at. If I click on the image, then we can see operator 1 filter mode. Let's have a band pass instead. What this means is it chooses a center frequency to focus on and attenuates high and low frequencies around it. And you can see that graphically represented. You kind of get a nasal sort of effect depending on what resonance you've got set. You can see there's a slope. I nearly pointed at the monitor then. There's a slope on both directions leading up to the resonant peak. And finally, high pass throws low stuff away. The weird thing about high pass is that the cutoff knob is inverted. So as we turn the cutoff knob all the way up to maximum, we're going to throw away so many low frequencies that we're left with ultimately nothing. And there it's gone. As we pull the cutoff all the way down, we let all the low frequencies back in and we get our sound back again. Now you can see that all of this stuff that I'm doing on the synthesizer, it's actually updating this little graphical display telling you what the wave looks like in real time, and you can compare it with the oscilloscope. See that it's really pretty accurate. This is a very nice graphical representation of what the wave is actually doing at any given time. Just a few more things to look at very quickly today. We'll have a look at the output section, which is over here. Again, every operator has its own output section. All of these values are completely bespoke and unique to each operator. Let's have a look at feedback first. Now, feedback basically means the output signal, whatever wave shape we have from this operator, is fed back into the operator and applies a modulation to the operator, which causes a subsequent change to the wave. Basically, think of feedback as like an alternative method of saturation. In other words, adding more and more harmonics to the sound, making it more and more complex. We've already got quite a complex sounding wave here. If I increase the frequency knob, you see it get more and more intense in insight as additional harmonics are added. And eventually, we add so many harmonics to the sound that we've got all of the harmonics. And another way to describe all of the harmonics is noise. That's what noise is. And we've now lost all tonal identity whatsoever, and noise generators can be very useful in synthesizers, so this is something that we can't overlook. We need to know it's there. Just a few more terms to go at now. The next one is AM sensitivity, which is this knob here. And what this basically means is that the synthesizer itself as a global whole has the ability to modulate amplitude, which is volume. In other words, it's like a tremolo, a built-in tremolo system. Think of it that way. It's actually at the top of the synthesizer, completely outside of the main editing page, amplitude modulation. So if I increase that knob, I've now enabled amplitude modulation on the synthesizer, but each individual operator has to subscribe to that control in order to be affected by it. And that's what we do with the AM sensitivity knob. So if I press a key, there's no volume change there, no amplitude modulation is being applied until I turn the knob up. And now you can just see in the viewer below the wave dancing up and down a little bit. There are 4 settings, 0, 1, 2 and 3. And now if I increase the master amplitude modulation amount, that modulation of volume will get more and more intense. Exactly the same thing with velocity sensitivity, which is this control here. Increase velocity sensitivity, and now this is just an intrinsic part of the keyboard. There isn't a master control that sets the total amount of velocity sensitivity. But if I press a very light key, and now a key that's a little bit harder, we have velocity sensitivity. Turn this knob back down, really soft key, really loud key, absolutely the same. And the very last one for today is pan. And again, double click the control, and we centralize the pan again. So those are basic oscillator functions. We've seen that kind of thing, really straightforward waveforms, simple filters, output settings. The amplitude modulation thing is a little bit quirky, but all of that is really, really straightforward. So that's the building block, the fundamental building block of how the synthesizer makes sound, just like any other. In the next episode, we'll introduce a second operator that contains a second oscillator, and we'll start to interact with those two oscillators, and that's when things start getting a little bit interesting. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please do click the like button, and I'll see you for the next time. Thanks for watching.